Everybody, and welcome to another wonderful webinar with Epilepsy South Africa. On this cold afternoon in Johannesburg, I'm Charlene Castle, your National Director, and as always, thrilled to be with you. Epilepsy South Africa is the only national organization that serves people with epilepsy and other neurological disorders, and we are always so excited to educate and advocate for people with epilepsy. And today I'm joined by three really special people that are part of Epilepsy South Africa as advocates, as friends, and as colleagues. So I'd like to welcome, first is Andrew Godlington. Andrew is an esteemed colleague and has been an HR executive for many years, and joins us today to share his expertise about epilepsy in the workplace and many other important things we're going to talk about today. I'm joined also by Dominique Pays. Dominique is a person with epilepsy, and I'm looking forward to, as always, hearing his lived experience and how this key topic has impacted his world. Karen Robinson is a senior social worker who has been with Epilepsy South Africa for more than 20 years. And it's a privilege to work with Karen and hear from her and enjoy her expertise and contributions, how she contributes to people with epilepsy in so many ways. So just welcome to Dominique and to Andrew and to Karen. It's lovely to have you all with us today. Just to kickstart today, and to the purpose today is to really highlight the key points that persons with epilepsy have in the workplace. And one of the first things as a person with epilepsy that I always say to everybody when we start this topic is, it is so key for you to know and understand your own diagnosis. Epilepsy is not a one-size-fits-all neurological disorder. Every person with epilepsy has a different part of their brain affected in a different way, although we do talk to specific categorization around different seizures, as has evolved through the classifications and the understanding of the neurological world today. So knowing your specific seizure type is very important in understanding the workplace for yourself and understanding what you need. So I'm going to kickstart and just throw the ball at Dominique very joyfully here and say, Dominique, share with us, who are you? When did your epilepsy begin? Share with us about your epilepsy and about your very interesting work-life journey as a person with epilepsy.
Thank you, Charlene. So welcome to all, and hello, colleagues. So I'm Dominique. I've been working in the family business for the last 10 years. We're in the office furniture manufacturing space. So I don't necessarily work in the factory in a dangerous space for epileptics like myself. But I'm involved in more than just working. And I think this is why Charlene likes to hear my stories. I'm part of
It is absolutely.
I'm part of a lot of extreme hyper environments such as search and rescue. I'm a past scout. I like doing things that really push people that live with epilepsy to the extreme. Last year, I took on a challenge and walked the Camino in aid of epilepsy, and raised some funds for the educational trust. And I faced a challenge because last year I had, I think it was three really big seizures. And I was told by the doctor that you're not doing this. I said, I'm doing it. And I did. But yeah, working in the environment, it's not always easy, especially after you've had a seizure. Thankfully, this year, I haven't had any, and I hope it stays that way. Thankfully, I work within a family business, at least, and I've got the support structure of my parents being here, and I've got one or two staff that understand what they need to do. But what it does for me in the mental space is it does break me down. because I'm like 1 or 2 weeks out after having a severe seizure. All my seizures have always been grand mal, and I take a really long time to recover. I started having seizures at a very young age, as early as 3 or 4 years of age, and we only realized what they were by the age of 6, 7, around there. So I was a really late diagnosed with it, and by the time we were actually told what they were, it was, I could have been treated earlier, and the doctor suspected that I was actually born with it. I'm 32 this year, so I've pretty much lived with it all my life. I live a pretty normal life, can't complain. We just got to look after ourselves, really.
Thanks, Dominique. And I think when you have grown up with epilepsy, as you and I have, it becomes quite a norm to just carry on at work and just kind of just be really pushing the boundaries, like you say, in different environments. Last year, Dominique called me and said, were you at Mill Park today? I was like, yeah, I'd just come out of X, Y, and Z, or I'd just been discharged from a seizure. Or I was like, well, what are you doing there? He says, no, I was at the neurologist, and it turned out we shared a neurologist. So I think Dominique and I come from a space of, once you have a seizure, we certainly, and I can speak from my side as I've got older, is understand today that one grand mal seizure, or tonic-clonic, as we also call them today, classify them, takes a minimum of a month for your brain to actually recover. And that is key, because in the workplace, we are exposed to so many different elements that your brain is consistently being sensorially stimulated in every single way, as you are when you walk through a shopping center, and you, as a person without epilepsy, would not notice. But when one has epilepsy in the workplace and you're dealing with all the loaded things, all the additional elements, we're going to hear from our other panelists in a minute, but those things really play a huge role. And I think I'm going to just ask Andrew, when we're looking at the workplace, Andrew, we all have responsibilities, right? As a person with epilepsy, being the employee, as the employer. And I think when we look at, and often people say, Charlene, how do we know what reasonable accommodation looks like for a person with epilepsy? Because it's invisible. We don't know what we need to do. Even a person on the other side that has epilepsy says, I don't actually know often what I need. So just guide us, unpack that for us. What does reasonable accommodation look like? Talk to us about all those elements that I think you and I we all discuss quite regularly.
Thanks. And I think I want to just start off by saying how much I learn, and wish I could have learned this a long time ago. And the reason I say that is, when I was still in the corporate world with a staff of 3,500 odd people, I was not, as the health and safety manager responsible for all of those people, I was not in a position, due to ignorance, to actually help people. And, if somebody had a heart attack, well, that was a different story, because strange though it may sound, it's a lot easier to deal with something like that. So I think that is for me the issue, is that people don't know what to do and don't know how to react. And I think that's the big issue. Now, if you are a person that suffers from epilepsy, or for that matter, any chronic disease, I think that the best policy that you could follow would be to disclose that illness. And the reason I say that is, if the employer has a responsibility to ensure the safety of all of their staff. But how do they carry out that responsibility if they don't know. And that's a big issue. Now, I've had an employee that worked, a general worker that worked in a warehouse, didn't disclose anything, tried to hide it. In fact, what he did was he built out of boxes this little space in the one sort of corner of this warehouse. And if he would know generally that when he was going to have a seizure, and he would hide himself away in this little enclosure that he built for himself until he'd had the seizure. Until one day, he didn't know that for some reason that he was about to have a seizure. And fortunately, he wasn't climbing on racks or anything like that. He was walking through the warehouse and literally fell flat on his face. I was informed of this and called the paramedics. He then refused treatment from the paramedics because he didn't want to then have to admit that he suffered from epilepsy. And that's the problem, is from both sides, is the employer needs to be educated, and the employees need to be upfront about what's wrong with them in order to put the employer in a position to be able to assist. Now, Charlene mentioned that, different types of seizures, etc. That is, in my mind, vital information. So what happens when you have this type of seizure or that type of seizure? What do I do as the person responsible for your health and safety? So I think I've always said that disclosure, in my mind, is vitally important. As far as accommodation is concerned, employers can accommodate employees. There's no doubt about it. Again, as long as they know what that person experiences and is going through, etc., etc. So to use a slightly different example, or an example where an employee actually suffered from HIV and AIDS, she had to go to the clinic every Wednesday morning, but she worked 5.5 days a week, meaning she worked Monday to Friday, including Saturday. So what we did was we accommodated her by changing her work hours so that she could go to the clinic every Wednesday morning, but then she worked a full day on Saturday. And that was by agreement. So in other words, it's sitting down with the person and having an upfront, honest conversation with them and saying, fine, how do we accommodate you? Now, I think that it's probably worthwhile to say, and Dominique was mentioned sort of in a way that, no, he doesn't work actually in the dangerous area. But what about somebody that does? How do you deal with that person? Because if you've got heavy machinery or let me just call it dangerous machinery, what do you do? Because it almost becomes impossible in that situation to accommodate, let me say, everybody where there is that danger, because it would be irresponsible to put a person who is suffering from epilepsy in a way, excuse me, where they are working with dangerous machinery. So a person like that, in my mind, would be far better suited in a different type of environment. But how do you get to that point where you can make that decision? Is with the employer being educated again, and the employee being honest and upfront.
Thanks, Jase. Thanks, Andrew. I think you're alluding to so many important points, and we're asking, what does reasonable accommodation look like for a person with epilepsy? And I'm hearing so much valuable information there from you. So when I share and say, know your diagnosis, understand your epilepsy, the reason for that is in the workplace, if you're listening to what Andrew's saying, as if you are having regular seizures and you are able to predict your seizures like that gentleman, don't accept a job where you know you're placing yourself at risk or other people at risk. Know that If temperatures vary and you have to work in a freezer or you're working in heated areas, those could be triggers to your epilepsy in the work environment. If you have epilepsy and you've recently had a seizure and you're doing nighttime driving or shifts where you're driving, understand you are placing yourself at risk and other people at risk. So if you have photosensitive epilepsy, and I'm giving you lots of examples, and you have photosensitive epilepsy, don't work in an environment where flickering lights are part of your day. Or if you do have photosensitive epilepsy, ensure you're saying to your employer when there are very bright lights in an environment, please can you accommodate me, reduce the lighting, put softer bulbs into the fittings which are available. And that is one of the things that looks like reasonable accommodation. But to reiterate what Andrew's saying, disclosure is so critical. I recently was at an Indaba and one of the individuals in the audience with epilepsy turned around and said, we're talking about stigma, but I want to say to everybody how much I self-stigmatize myself, that I'm consistently putting myself down. I'm consistently making my epilepsy something I should hide, I should not speak about. And I'm going to ask Karen just to share a little bit with us from her background, because when Karen and I were chatting, we were unpacking in terms of what is her prior experience in terms of people with epilepsy in this context look like? What has she been exposed to? Where has she given psychosocial support to? And what are all those linkages to work? And I'd really like to throw this to Karen and say, can you just share your knowledge with us? And I know you've got 5 very, very key topics to address. So before I throw that at you, I just want to say to Maxie on the chat is that, yes, a general question is, it's a difficult question to ask. I'm going to reiterate, every person experiences the epilepsy differently. I have auras. So in my latter years of my life, now that I'm older, I have auras where I know a seizure is coming on. Dominique, do you know when a seizure is coming on?
So interesting. I've never had auras up until late last year.
Okay. So interesting question. Again, immediately 2 people are saying 2 different. So difficult, it is different from one person to the next. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Charlene, and also welcome to everyone that's online. I think from my side, as a senior social worker and being in the field for over 27 years, I've had the privilege of, walking along many individuals with epilepsy, and whereby you get first an experience of what their work life experiences have been. And I think one thing is clear, that it's not just shaped, because of the epilepsy itself, but it is how society and also how the workplace respond. So what stands out most for me is that the greatest barriers people are facing within the, the work-life experiences are social and not medical. And then there's 5 issues that I just want to, based from my experiences, focus on. And the previous panelists have also, emphasized the whole issue of stigma and disclosure. So many individuals with epilepsy experience fear and anxiety around disclosing, that they have not just epilepsy, but any disability. And that is just unfortunately due to the persistent stigma, that prevents people to disclose. And if you engage with people asking them, why don't you disclose? It's about that they are scared that they're going to be treated differently, or they're going to be excluded from opportunities. So in my experience, I've supported clients who were passed over promotions. They were excluded from projects just because they had a seizure at work, despite the fact that they're competent at what they're doing. So for me, I think, and it's been emphasized also previously, the whole fact about, it's very important that we must have a supportive, rights-based workplace culture where people are feeling, I think Andrew also spoke about it, where people are feeling safe, that I can disclose not just my disability, but also my health condition. I'm not going to be penalized. Then the second thing is employment barriers. people with epilepsy, they struggle to access or retain employment. Even the fact when they disclose during, the interview process and not being accepted, they're not being told the reason why, but they obviously, one of the factors is because they disclosed. I think also employers hold a lot of incorrect assumptions about productivity, about safety, and about reliability issues when it comes to a person with epilepsy or any other disabilities. I've worked with individuals who were denied opportunities outright because employers would consider them as a risk, even knowing that the person declares that my epilepsy is well known. And I think these assumptions, it not only violates the right to equality, but it strips the person, the opportunity to earn a livelihood. And also we know that, when you work, it gives you that form of independence. So there is, and Andrew also, and I want to stress what Andrew and Charlene said, is that there is a critical need for education in the workplace around epilepsy and other neurological disorders. And also, and I like the practical suggestions that was given by Charlene, it was given by Dominic also, and Andrew about, how do we reasonably accommodate people, to make sure that they can also participate in the workplace. Then when it comes to workplace experiences, even if you are employed, people have shared that, there is the subtle discrimination that still persists. People are excluded from growth opportunities. When they have a seizure at work, they are treated as fragile. They are treated as if they are stupid. People talk behind their backs after, or even when they disclose, because now they have the seizure, maybe they didn't disclose, but now they disclose, yes, I do have epilepsy or whatever other disability. And we know that these experiences can be very isolating. For me, again, this reflects, again, attitudes. It's not about the condition itself, but attitudes that often is a real barrier. And I think that's why the whole thing, why this webinar is important, because we're educating people, employers about, a person with a disability is capable. And then I think the fourth one is mental health and isolation. And I think, Dominic, when you shared your experience, said that your mental health, is kind of affected. And I think also from my experiences with working with people is that we know that work is not about income. Yes, we need money to survive, but it's also about our identity. It's about inclusion. So the emotional toll of being excluded and misunderstood is very significant. People can develop symptoms of depression, anxiety, they isolate themselves. And this is especially for people with epilepsy, and sometimes people lose their jobs. I've seen that. Once they disclose, they lose their jobs, they struggle to access employment, and they see themselves as being a burden, especially if they've been, either they lost their job or they've been, long unemployed. A lady that I worked with shared with, she felt like a burden to her family. And also the way she was, just mistreated after she was not, providing an income to the family, that she actually decided to isolate herself, to not go anywhere, and eventually, unfortunately, she developed depression and was placed on a lot of medication. So for me, again, it just shows that, that employment inclusion is deeply rooted, I think, with psychosocial well-being. And then lastly, what I want to say, let's go, because we said we want to also be positive and give people hope. I do want to acknowledge that the people that I've worked with, I want to emphasize that they are very resilient, despite what they are going through. I want to acknowledge, that they have strength within them I always say, look at the positives. You've been through this. Let's tackle this together. And when they are given, people with epilepsy or any disability or any health condition, when they are provided with reasonable accommodation, just like Andrew and Charlene was saying, very practical things. It can be flexi hours. It can be just understanding. I think Dominic says, when you had your recovery time, know that if I recover, it's going to be either I need to rest for 2 hours or I'm going to be confused, so I might need to go home. Things like that. Listen, simple adjustments will make people to thrive and excel. And then lastly, I just want to say under strengths and advocacy is, I feel that, when employers create an inclusive environment, they unlock the potential that benefits the entire organization. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share those experiences.
Thank you, Karen. And you certainly dropped gems in there. I love how you say livelihood and a right to work. I love how you say don't isolate yourself. And you need to educate the employer. And one of the things that I really want to unpack, and then I'm going to ask Andrew, because I think it's really his chance to weigh in on some of these points, but recruitment, you touched on something, recruitment and stigma, and how many people actually ask, when I write, see there's over 50% of our population is unemployed, and I write disability, epilepsy, and a recruiter who doesn't understand epilepsy and is driven by fear immediately discards that CV. So we're denying that person an opportunity, an equal opportunity to access that role. The importance of these conversations cannot be stressed enough. We have to break the fear of epilepsy being this thing to be scared of. And I have to reiterate, it's a neurological disorder. It's not demon possession. It's not a spirit. It's none of the suspicions or it's not a curse. It's not contagious. All these
Not from another world.
Sorry, Dominique?
It's not from another world.
It's not from another world. A person with epilepsy is normal. We are normal. We have a neurological disorder. I am not defined by my epilepsy. And what I want to ask Andrew is, one of the reasons Epilepsy South Africa exists, or one of our driving missions in this world, is to ensure that people with epilepsy are accepted and included into society without discrimination. And what I want to ask you, Andrew, is talk to us about the labor law. Talk to us about how is a person with epilepsy protected by our labor law in South Africa? Talk to us about your advice to an employer with the policy they right to accommodate and include epilepsy. So no loaded or heavy question there, Andrew, no, but we look forward to hear your expertise on this.
You see, I think in a sense, there's a law that you cannot, in labor law, there's a law that says you cannot discriminate against people on all sorts of grounds. There's a whole list of them. And that law was obviously written to protect people from discrimination. But then let's put the other cap on. So how do I protect myself as an employer and make sure that I'm not discriminating against anybody? And I go to what Karen said. I don't tell you that I'm not employing you because you suffer from epilepsy. You just weren't suitable. So that's essentially the problem. It's one of those catch-22 situations. But what I want to say is, some years ago, the government brought in a document, or Department of Labor, I should say, brought in a document, and it's called an EEA1. Now, if you, as an employer, employ somebody, you are supposed to complete that EEA1. And it's a document that essentially where you disclose any disabilities that you have. Now, I think there's a problem, because if I went and audited 10 companies, I wonder what the result would be in terms of how many of those 10 companies actually do fill in this EEA1. The second problem is, when that document was brought in, and again, I'll go back to what Karen was talking about. We issued that document again to all of the staff, and every single one of them declared that they didn't have a disability. Now, all that means is that a certain percentage of those employees lied. And why did they lie? Because they were scared that, as Karen said, they were scared that they were going to be discriminated against or victimized in some way or another. And that's the problem that we sit with in this country, is we actually have to get past, because there is that fear that Karen refers to. But there's also that fear that the employers sit with. And that fear comes again out of ignorance. So, you know, you are protected to go to that point. You are protected in terms of the fact that you can disclose your illness to me as an employer, and I can't share that information. But I think it would be fair to say at the same time that as time goes or passes, and you have suffered seizures at work, people are going to get to know that. And really, it becomes an issue of culture within your organization. What do you do as a business owner to develop a culture in your organization that doesn't, and I'm not talking about policies and all of that, those fancy things. How do you develop a culture within your workforce that is caring rather than discriminatory? It's the wrong way of saying that. Anyway, but so my point is I suppose we sit with an unfortunate culture, which is, it's all about me, and we have to change that. From a policy point of view, the policies, now, as a labor consultant, I deal with a lot with small, medium or SMEs, and many of them do not have policies in place. And I'm saying to you today that if you do own a company, your compliance documentation is so important. Yes, from a legal point of view, let's accept that. But from all the points of view that we are talking about here today, that policy must include a policy on discrimination. At the same time, you must develop a culture in your organization where if somebody is being discriminated against, that they have the freedom to talk about that discrimination. And if it means that the person who discriminated against you lands up being disciplined for it, well, so be it, because it's unacceptable to discriminate against people in the workplace for any reason, but without a doubt for any kind of illness. So I'm saying, does your company have a policy? Does that policy include a discrimination policy? Does it include, for an example, even, well, it's not POPI because that's personal information, where you're linking personal information. But again, any illness that you have, it is your choice whether you, so if you look at a sick note, the doctor will never say what is actually physically wrong with you. He will say, or the doctor will say medical condition. It becomes your choice whether you disclose it or not. And it's actually interesting. Yeah, sorry, it's interesting how many times the word of disclosure has come up in this discussion today.
Yeah.
Sorry, Charlene.
No, I just wanted to jump into what you're saying and say to you, at what point do you disclose? At what point do you, when you are in, at what point people are scared to disclose on their CVs, right? Because the recruiters may just discard their CVs, and in this climate, potentially they will. It's easier to understand a physical disability. It's easier we have advanced in society. We have fought for so many rights for physical disabilities, but it's very scary to deal with an invisible disability. So at what point, Andrew, do you advise that employee to disclose? When is it appropriate? And how are they protected in the workplace? I know once you've had a seizure in the workplace, it's known, right? And then it becomes different. But at what point?
Well, I mean, the answer to that question from a labor law perspective is, does your company have that EEA1 form, disability form that I'm talking about? And if they do, well, in theory, that would be the time that you disclose it, is when you complete that form, which should be either at an, depending on how the companies operate, either at the interview stage or at the stage where you actually get to sign an employment contract. Now, let me use a personal example. So I suppose I should say I'm fortunate that I'm not a sufferer of epilepsy, but I do have type 2 diabetes. Now, if I have, and in simple terms, if I have a sugar low, in theory, what that means is that I'm heading, as my sugar levels drop, I'm heading into a coma. Because the world starts to go dark around me, and I suppose I talk less and I would just become silent. So in a sense, it's similar in that it is at that point, it becomes a silent disease. If somebody doesn't know that I am a sufferer of, or I am diabetic, what happens then? They don't know how to react, because I'm agitated. I'm not speaking a lot. And when I do sort of head into the sort of darker part of just in other words, prior to a coma, I'm not talking. So I can't say to you, this is, just give me some sugar, or give me a sweet, or whatever the case is. Now, if I've not disclosed that, well, then I'm going to go into a diabetic coma. If I have disclosed it, and somebody that potentially or maybe sits close to me in the workplace or works close to me, can say, oh, well, and this is what Andrew's going through. Let's do this, let's do that. So yes, let's acknowledge the fear that everybody has mentioned, but let's also accept the fact that in one way or another, you have to, and I do understand what I'm saying, by the way, you have to get over that fear and disclose it for your safety, and so that people around you can help keep you safe.
Thank you, Andrew. And I think that's so valid. I mean, it was only up until 10 years ago that about 10 years ago that I started sharing about my journey and about my own personal epilepsy. And it really was difficult, and it takes tremendous amount of bravery and self-determination and self-disclosure to actually say to people, I have epilepsy and that's okay. And this is what I need. So even today, through the months and the years that I've lived with epilepsy, and I have epilepsy, it's been difficult. Just 3 months ago, I had a major episode that I haven't been able to talk about. And I'll share with you now, it's going to be the first time I share it, is that I actually had a grand mal seizure at 2 a.m. in the morning and landed on my face and broke all 7 bones in my nose. Had surgery, had stage 2 concussion, and it's been hugely difficult to overcome. And I can still feel how my brain is recovering. Now, just sharing that alone is hard. It brings up emotion. It brings up, am I going to be judged? Am I going to be thought of differently when I say my brain is in recovery? Or do I propagate a space of, I need to know more, I need to learn about what she's talking about. I need to understand when Dominique says, I need time to recover. Because it's easy to talk about in hindsight when you had a seizure quite a while ago or a few years ago, but to be raw and exposed is hard. And to stand up at work and go, I know I'm going to be at risk of saying this, but you need to know. Because if I have a seizure, I need you, and Dominique needs you, and the 50 million other people globally that have epilepsy need you to put us on our sides, put us into our fetal position, get our head, make sure it's on our side, that our esophagus stays open, and wait for us to come around. Don't shove things in our mouths. Don't shake us. Don't panic. Let us come around and time our seizures. We need you to understand that when we have a seizure, we can't help ourselves. We need you. And in the workplace, we need your first aid officers to understand epilepsy, to be speaking about it in the workplace, in educational sessions, in first aid sessions, that even if staff haven't disclosed, 1 in 100 people today in South Africa have epilepsy, which means there's 128 of you in the room today, plus the 4 of us, 132 people. There's a minimum of 4 or 5 of you online with us, excluding Dominique and I, that have epilepsy. And we are not getting into those affected by epilepsy, the carers, the loved ones, the brothers and sisters, because each and every one of you know what I'm talking about. And I want to bounce to Dominique now and say, you know, Dominique, one of the things you mentioned is how invaluable your family's been for the last 10 years with you working in the family environment from a support place. Now, talk to us about how being in a supportive environment has enabled you to be included and functional at work. What do you think? Just reflect for a moment. What do you think would have happened if you didn't have that? And how has it enabled you to be who you are today and use those strengths that you have?
So I've seen how it's changed. My parents, who obviously deal with the HR and manage higher management of the business. I mean, we employ people. I've got 2 staff other than myself that are epileptic and others that have other issues. And we've gone through what Andrea has mentioned, like I've got policies in place. I look after the health and safety of the company. So I've got all those things in place specifically because I've looked into the research. I do 2 toolbox talks with the guys and the staff to make sure that everyone understands that it's okay, this taboo of even from an HIV perspective, because that HIV's been publicized and taught through school, but no one talks about everything else, you know?
Yeah.
And my staff are quite comfortable around each other, thankfully. Particularly one of the ladies who's our seamstress in the upholstery factory, you know, we've helped her realize when she first joined us, to give you an idea, she was very quiet about it. And until she had that first seizure, and like, but why didn't you tell us? Like, there's nothing wrong. Dominique's got epilepsy. Like, I've never had a seizure at the office, or at this building rather. But you know, when they realized, and the staff that did know that I had, they spoke to her and said, but it's okay. The bosses know how to deal with this. It's you in a safe space, you know. And I think that sort of changed the perception for our staff, at least, that they in a safe space to confine in us, to help, for them to come and seek help, and that, you know, they're not going to be let go or discriminated against. And if there's opportunity for growth in their roles. But coming back to your question, I think if I was outside of my role, I have thought about it, or outside of my family business, I have thought about it, that like what it's like. Back in my chefing days, when I used to chef a bit, it was a challenge for me because of the long hours, and not many people in the kitchen knew that I was epileptic. I was more stable then, straight out of school, to some point. But yeah, it was, you know, to then find another job and get into a different kitchen. Yeah, I also faced some challenges to move on and progress. I don't know, can't confirm or and say it was because of me putting there that this is my condition or not.
Thank you, Dominique. And you again are touching on so many beautiful topics here, because the word, the word disclosure, the word reasonable accommodation, I think it gets bandied around so much. And where we're coming from is saying, be kind, be humane, be inclusive. We live in a society that is filled with discrimination, and every single person with us today can take that upon themselves to leave as a thought and go, how do we be more inclusive? How do we live our life moment by moment? Thinking positively, coming from a place of understanding, and constantly saying, what would love do now? Because Andrew talked about culture. Culture in the workplace is not just a wave of the wand. Culture is about communication. Culture is about seeking to understand. Culture, if we had companies today that actually didn't only care about money, but actually so many do care about people. And their bottom lines are even better because people buy people. People stay with companies when they feel cared for, when they feel supported, when they feel heard, and it's okay to be different. And, you know, I think as a person with epilepsy, one of the things that I've never stopped doing is personal growth, is that every day I reflect. And I was just saying to Karen before this today, if you are not reflecting, outside of even having epilepsy, and you anyone with us today, if you're not reflecting, what is happening? Or are you just existing? And you've heard expert advice from Andrew, expert advice from Karen. You've heard a lived experience from Dominique, going, understand, build support networks, understand your own capability as an employer, understand what your staff can do. Understand that if people are not disclosing upfront in your company, you have also a problem, because people are living a culture of fear within your company, and it's not healthy. So, you know, I always like to leave time for questions and answers, and I see there's a lot of information coming through, and I want to just answer some of the questions that I'm seeing in the Q&A and that I'm seeing in the chats. And one of the things is about talking about the psychosocial issues within the workplace, Karen, and how it's, in most cases, they've noticed it can be psychosocial and emotional, draining for them, as they tend to think in most cases people end up treating them like charity cases. And so some even don't even take it seriously, and they just feel like they're being judged. I mean, Karen, it's what you've been saying. So I think so much of what we've been discussing today is certainly relevant, certainly answering the questions that are being asked. And I just want to ask you and Karen, Andrew, Dominique, just for a few closing questions, and ask everybody, if you do have questions, please drop it in the Q&A box at the bottom. And what we will do, if we're not answering them today, and our panelists don't discuss them now in the closing, is that we will take screenshots and we will put answers on Epilepsy South Africa Facebook support page, where the topics are continually being chatted about. And this session will be shared on our YouTube channel, so please follow us. Karen, Dominique, Andrew, let's go to Andrew. Andrew, last closing thoughts. Leave us with some really insights from your experience, from what you've heard today. Doesn't have to be a one-liner, just give us some last thoughts.
Well, I was just wondering, in terms of accommodation, what the effect has been of remote working, because that would be, in my mind, and I hope I'm right, an absolutely ideal way to accommodate somebody that is a sufferer, but obviously in an admin or accounting or finance type position, because they don't really need to be sitting in an office. And if you take remote working, makes flexibility or flexi time so much easier. So,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, sort of flexi time became very fashionable, if that's the right word, when we went through COVID. But I still, I mean, it's remained. So there is that possibility that people can do that. But yeah, in terms of a closing comment, I'm going to end off with what I started. Education, disclosure, culture. Let's care about each other.
Thanks, Andrew. And, you know, I'm just listening to each as well. And one of the topics, there's a number of topics that in the interest of time, we couldn't speak about today, but the factors in the work environment, like stress. Stress causes and triggers seizures. Stress causes many of our chronic illnesses in our world today. And again, manage your stress in the work environment. And one of those things is, again, I heard Dominique say it, I heard Karen, and I'm sure I heard Andrew as well, is that when you are being conscious of your epilepsy and you know your limits, you will understand how important sleep is. If you are not sleeping, Dominique's nodding, right? If you are not getting good quality sleep, you are going to have seizures. Why are you not having enough sleep? Because you're so stressed. Why are you not having enough? Why have you got so much stress at work? Because you're spending all that time in front of a screen. You're working in noisy places. You're doing things that are stretching you so much. You're dealing with family, life, you're eating badly. And so all those lifestyle topics come into play. They are big topics to address, and they are topics we will address as independent. But what I'm going to say to you, and I'll wrap up just now, is you need to be looking at all those things as well. And on that note, I'm going to say, Dominique, I just triggered your few last words.
Yeah, look, I'll end off with just trying to maybe leave some motivation. So I've spoken a bit of my work side of things, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm part of search and rescue, and you know, to put everyone in the picture slightly, search and rescue is fun for me, but it's also very high drive. You've got to be very focused. You need to know what you're doing. You're literally trusting people with your life on the line, like literally when you're going down the edge of a cliff on ropes and stuff. And we work in and around helicopters, dangerous environments. And again, you know, my colleagues thankfully know when I'm not right, or they see something's wrong, or they see I'm getting too stressed, they'll pull me out the field. And it's been one of those blessings that, like, okay, if you say so, I don't challenge them. I'll go make them tea for when they come out the field. And I'm happy with that job, because it's like, I rather not be putting the rest of the team in. But the message that I want to leave is, sometimes we need to realize, okay, we've done what we could as a person with epilepsy. We've gotten that far. We've done what we could. Now there's something else for us to do that might be a little bit less lighter work. And there are people that recognize that, actually, hang on, you've done it well. Okay, now step back. We'll take over from you before you fall over on your face, you know? And thankfully, I've got a team like that. And I think in the work environment, the sooner companies and businesses realize that too, the better it will be for employees.
Thanks, Dominique. Thank you. Karen.
I think from my side, I want to say to every person, you know, with epilepsy, you have every right to a meaningful and dignified work, environment. Your diagnosis does not define your potential. And with the right support, understanding, reasonable accommodations, you can thrive in any workplace. Never, never, never be afraid to ask for what you need, because it's not a weakness, it's your strength. And then lastly, to the employers, I want to say, when you're creating inclusive spaces, and like all of us, on the panel is saying, that culture of care, that culture where people feel safe, that they, will disclose, because you can sense immediately, is it safe for me? Are people going to judge me if I have a seizure? So I do want to encourage employers, create inclusive safe spaces. You're not just doing the right thing, but you're basically gaining incredible talent, resilient people, with epilepsy or any neurological disorders.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. And I'm going to end off, and I'm going to just say to you, thank you to each and every one of you for giving us the space and the time in your lives to share and talk and be open about what's going on in the world. And hopefully today, each of you have taken a nugget away with you to go and make a difference in someone else's life. And I'd like to share Epilepsy South Africa has been educating and advocating and looking after people with epilepsy since 1967. We have a plethora of information for you at our fingertips. We've filled up our resource library on the website. We've got branches in 6 of the 9 provinces, so please reach out. If you'd like, as an organization, you'd like support and come to us to share information or intranet or have a speaker, please reach out. And what really is easy is become a member of our organization. Email us, be in touch with us. We are here for you as you are for us. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your Thursday. And thank you to our special panelists for joining us today, Karen, Dominique, and Andrew. We truly appreciate and value your time today. Thank you, everyone, once again, and have a beautiful afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.